88.7 FM. Online, gobrave.org. A tune-in radio station. Part of the William Patterson Broadcast Network.
Broadcasting live from Hobart Hall in Wayne, New Jersey.
This is
The Innovative.
I think they're really unique.
The Fearless.
They have awesome variety.
The Kick-Ass.
I love Brave New Radio.
The Sensational.
I've never heard anything like it.
This is the one and only Brave New Radio.
The views and opinions expressed on this show are solely those of the host and guest and are not necessarily supported by WPSC 88.7 FM, station management, or the station owner, William Patterson University. Anyone wanting to offer differing opinions may do so by calling the show at 973-720-2738. Abusive callers will be rejected. Now here's your program on WP 88.7 FM, Brave New Radio.
Well, good morning, good morning. Good morning to you. And that's my greeting every Saturday morning. Those of you who listen on a regular basis, you know when you hear me say good morning, good morning, good morning to you, that we have kicked off another edition of the Reading Circle with your host, Marc Medley, where we come to you live each week, where we interview authors from around the world, from around the globe, and we keep you up to date what's going on in the literary world. And we are going to do that again this morning, and not only in the literary world and political world and all kinds of worlds. So the show is meant to inspire and to entertain and to motivate and do a whole lot of different things, depending on how you're filtering what it is that we're saying. It ought to do something to you. If you take the time to rise early on a Saturday morning to join us, you ought to get something out of it. So without further ado, you know the routine. I am going to share the weather with you. Then I am going to read from two passages or two books. Since this is the Reading Circle, we kick off reading. Then I'm going to introduce my guest. I'm going to share some information with you, and then we come back and our interview will resume. So we're going to jump right on into that right now. It is 43.3 degrees, or 0.3 degrees rather, and we are going up to a high of 57. It's going to be overcast with showers at times. We're going to move back to a low of 40 tonight, cloudy with occasional rain showers, 50% chance of rain tonight, 40% chance of rain during the day. Then on tomorrow, Sunday, cloudy with occasional rain showers, high of 43, low of 37. Showers early on Sunday night, and then on Monday, periods of rain, high of 56 again, low of 44. Showers tapering off into the evening. Then on Tuesday, cloudy with occasional rain showers, high near 65, low of 47, showers in the evening. And then Wednesday, partly cloudy skies, high of 63, finally clearing up on Wednesday night with a low of 35. It is spring, so we can expect some rain, but they say April showers bring May flowers. Well, we're going to get a couple of those showers right here in the month of March, and that's okay. Better rain than snow, that's all I can tell you. I'm glad to see the ground clearing up as the snow that we had melts away. So that I am thrilled to see as the weather is warming up. And that is the weather brought to you right here from the WP 88.7 FM Weather Center. Well, as our ritual and routine, as I just shared that with you, I'm going to read from the book, The Power of Being Thankful, 365 devotions that lets us know about the power of gratitude. And that's written by Joyce Meyer. For today, March 25th, Joyce says, letting God have control. Many plans are in a man's mind, but it is the Lord's purpose for him that will stand. Proverbs 19:21. If you haven't done a good job of running your own life, why not turn it over to the one who created you and knows more about you than you will ever know about yourself? If you start having trouble with an automobile, you take it back to the people who manufactured it to fix it. A similar principle is true with God. He created you and loves you very much. If your life is not satisfying to you, then take it to Him to fix it. Your life will not change unless you make that very important decision to turn control of it over to God. And here's the good news. When you ask God to have His way in your life, He says, yes, quote unquote. He will repair the damaged areas, give you direction to keep you safe as you travel through life, and give you a joy you've never known. With God in control, you can be grateful that your life has a new direction, purpose, and hope for the future. Prayer of thanks. Father, today I ask you to take absolute control of my life. Help me let go. Thank you that you can run things better than I ever could. I pray that you would heal, transform, and restore my life. I am grateful for the exciting new things in you that are in my future. That is from the book, The Power of Being Thankful, 365 Devotions for Discovering the Strength of Gratitude by Joyce Meyer. Second book that we kick the show off with is by Iyanla Vanzant. And that's her book, Until Today, Daily Devotions for Spiritual Growth and Peace of Mind. For March 25th, she says, I open my heart and mind to be aware. I cannot hurt for someone else more than they hurt for themselves. Now that I can relate, because I work with students every day and I have to tell them the same thing. I cannot want this more than you want it. How do you assist a wounded person when they do not realize or are not willing to admit that they are wounded? We are talking about mental, emotional, and spiritual wounds. We're talking about internal wounds that drain the life force and cripple the spirit. We're talking about wounds that you can recognize because they are so much like your own. The wounds that you are healing or have healed. The kind of wounds that at one time you were not aware of or were not willing to acknowledge. The wounds that are so fresh in your memory that you recognize them when you see them on the soul of another. You can see their pain. Sometimes you can feel their pain. You can tell that their pain is the result of suppressed anger or embedded remorse. You know they are suffering, but unfortunately, they do not agree with you or will not admit it to you. When you see a wounded person, you want to ease their pain. You do everything you know how to do, and you offer to do more. You know they will feel better if they would just open up, if they would lay their burdens down. When you point out their pain, they deny it. When you ask them about their pain, they ignore it. Your awareness of their suffering is causing you to suffer. You want to put an end to the suffering, but you just don't know what to do. Here's a suggestion. Do your very best not to push a wounded person beyond where they are willing to go. Honor their boundaries. Honor their choices. It is important to realize that your only responsibility is to trust that when they are ready to be healed, they will be healed. Until today, you may have believed it was your duty to take other people out of their misery. Just for today, be aware that every living being has the capacity to do what they need to do when they are ready to do it. Today, I'm devoted to seeing everyone as capable of eliminating their own suffering. That's from the book Until Today by Iyanla Vanzant for March the 25th. And my guest has indeed called in, and he is on the line right on time. I'm going to get him introduced, and then I'll share some information with you. And folks, you know in the listening audience what to do when we get to the point where I'm sharing the information with you. I need you to get on all, and I mean all of your social media sites and let someone know that the Reading Circle is on the air and that my guest, Walter L. Fields Jr., is on the air with me. Walter L. Fields Jr. is the Chief Executive Officer and Executive Editor. Was the principal of Fields Communications, a New Jersey-based public affairs consultancy for 11 years. In his most immediate assignment, he served as Vice President for Government Relations and Public Affairs at the Community Service Society, one of New York City's oldest research, social policy, and advocacy organizations. During his career, Mr. Field have been an award-winning journalist who has written extensively on matters of race and public policy as a columnist for the New Jersey Reporter, MSNBC.com, The City News, and The Record, Bergen County, New Jersey. He also provided commentary on Newark, New Jersey-based National Public Radio, NPR affiliate WBGO Radio, and was a contributor to nationally syndicated News and Notes with Ed Gordon on NPR. Mr. Fields was one of the original political contributors on the MSNBC cable news channel and remains a frequent guest on regional and national public affairs programs. He has a master's degree in public administration with a specialization in public policy analysis from New York University's Robert F. Wagner Graduate School of Public Service and a bachelor's degree in political science from Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome to the Reading Circle microphones Walter L. Fields, Jr. Mr. Fields, good morning.
Good morning.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and share well, if you're in radio, you know when I say the term PSA, you know what I'm talking about. It's a public service announcement. I'm going to share some information with the audience. And then when we come back, we're going to start talking a little bit about everything you do, what you do, and the information that you talk about. And we're going to talk about North Star News and a little bit of all of it in the next hour or so. So hang on. Don't go away.
The following message is about Medicaid and CHIP, free or low-cost health coverage for kids and teens. Enrollment is open year-round.
Hey, voice lady, give me the mic.
Okay.
Hey, DJ, let's switch up the music. That's better. So listen up, moms and dads out there. There are these programs called Medicaid and CHIP. They offer free or low-cost health coverage for kids. Things like doctor and dentist visits, prescriptions, and shots are covered. All the stuff that keeps kids like me healthy and in charge.
So, as you can tell, a covered kid is a confident kid. And it means confident parents, too. To learn more about affordable health coverage for your family, visit healthcare.gov or call 1-877-KIDS-NOW. That's 1-877-543-7669.
Yep, you could do something big for your family today because enrollment is open year-round.
This has been a message from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
And Sophia.
Thanks, Julie. And coming up next, is there rain in your weekend forecast? We'll find...
Hey.
Hi.
It's been a while. Great place and nice neighborhood. You must have a strong community association board.
Thanks. I guess so, but I don't pay any attention to that stuff.
Seriously? How do you know for sure the board and community manager are making the right decisions to protect your investment?
I don't, but what am I supposed to do?
You can get involved and connect with CAI.
CA what?
CAI, Community Associations Institute, they're a nonprofit group that has helped us build a great community. They have free resources for your association board, professional training for community managers, and helpful information for homeowners.
Thanks. I'll definitely do that.
Is the time and investment you have made in your home and community protected? Be a smart homeowner and visit CAI at responsiblecommunities.com.
Listen to Brave New Radio on your smartphone with TuneIn Radio.
You're listening to The Reading Circle with Marc Medley on Brave New Radio.
Yes, indeed, you are listening to The Reading Circle with Marc Medley on WP 88.7 FM in the northern New Jersey, New York area. And we web stream all around the world. So somebody in Europe or Africa or China or Japan or wherever they are in the world, Australia, if they have internet connectivity, they can indeed hear the show. They can hear that on gobrave.org. It's just a matter of logging on to that and then hitting the little orange box that says listen here. Make sure their speakers are on or the headsets are in, and they can hear the show anywhere they are in the world. And again, for those of you here in the northern New Jersey area, we're on FM radio, WP 88.7 FM. As I just shared with you prior to sharing the public service announcements with you, my guest is Walter L. Fields, Jr., Chief Executive Officer and Executive Editor. and he has the North Star News. And I tell you what, Mr. Fields, we're going to roll the clock back a little bit in terms of where did your interest come from in terms of political science and communications?
It started at a very early age. You know, I'm a child of the 60s, and as a child, watching television and the developments across the country just intrigued me. So, you know, one of the first things I did, I had the benefit of growing up in an environment in my hometown of Hackensack, New Jersey, where there was a lot of political change going on. The first black councilman was elected when I was a child, and he happened to be my brother's godfather. So that certainly intrigued me. Out of my church in Hackensack was the first black person to ever serve in the executive office of the President of the United States, E. Frederick Morrow. And the Morrow family were family friends of ours. So I got exposed to politics early. And by fourth grade, I used to write the President of the United States to express my views. And I actually have copies of the letters that I wrote to President Johnson. They were actually in the archives of the Lyndon Johnson Presidential Library in Texas. And their archivist sent them to me. So it began very early because the 1960s were a time of great change. And on television every night, it seemed like the country and the world was changing before me. And I began to understand that the political process was how much of this change, particularly for the benefit of African Americans, was going to take place through politics.
So now your classmates or your friends that you played with at that age, were they like that too, or were you kind of like the exception?
I was probably the exception. You know, I'm the little kid who was watching the news just about every night on TV. I had great teachers who saw my interest, and my third grade teacher would stay after school whenever I wanted to talk about political developments in the country. She would stay after school, and we would talk. And then my fourth grade teacher, who I happen to be good friends with to this day, really encouraged me and also encouraged my writing at an early age. So I began to, write. I began to observe, and by the time I was a middle school student, I would have my mom drop me off at City Hall so that I could talk to the city council during city council meetings about the concerns I had about children and youth in our community. And then at age 13, the mayor of Hackensack made me the youngest appointee ever to a city board because I showed up to the city council meeting so much that he said, well, you might as well get involved officially. And he appointed me to the Youth Guidance Council as a 13-year-old kid. And luckily, again, I had great mentors because at the time, the deputy clerk for the city of Hackensack, who shortly later became the first black city clerk in the city, Doris Dukes, really guided me through that process and taught me how to read a municipal budget as a 13-year-old, taught me about how to read the city docket. And I also had another mentor who was on the Youth Guidance Council with me, Sissy Braithwaite, who unfortunately we lost a couple of years ago. But Sissy was a family friend who made sure before every meeting that I was really prepared. And I went on that board to conduct business on behalf of young people in the city of Hackensack.
That story is fascinating and, again, inspirational, but it also supports that what we do as children and your family structure, how much of an impact that has on what we do as adults. And the reason I ask, were you kind of the exception over all your friends like that? Because I work with children every day, and I'm trying to help them to understand that it's okay to be different. It's all right to stand out. It's all right if the rest of your friends want to do something nefarious, let them do that, and you go your own way. Because in my house growing up, the mantra between my mother and father when I was think for yourself. And you don't have to you don't have to go with the crowd. As a matter of fact, they made it very clear, if a fight or something is going along on your way home from school and we hear tell that you stop to watch it, then we're going to deal with you. And so me and my sister knew if somebody was fighting, we just kept on rolling.
Absolutely.
We did.
I think it does speak to the family, and I'm one of 6 in my family. Unfortunately, I lost my dad to cancer when I was 12, but I was the first boy after 4 girls.
Wow.
So I think some of it was also me trying to find ways with 4 older sisters, as the only boy, trying to find ways to engage myself. And I did that through my interest in politics. And I was just like any other kid. You know, I was out playing. I had good friends. In fact, I recently had lunch with a friend that I hadn't seen in 40 years, and I met him in first grade when he was at the principal's office, and I had to escort him to class as a new student, and he had just arrived in the country from Italy, like the week before.
Wow.
And he couldn't speak a word of English. And I went home that afternoon and looked over the fence, and my new neighbor was this new kid, and we became lifelong friends, this Italian kid and this African-American kid, and we attended birthday parties over each other's houses. But I just was someone who really was a kid that wanted to discover the world. Poor black kid from Hackensack, New Jersey, who just wanted to see what this world was like. So I just took it upon myself to do different things.
No, it's absolutely right. And again, I honestly believe in some sort of way God uses our childhoods almost in some respects as a practice for whenever we're adults. And that works good or bad. I mean, you have some folks that, and this is a message again, and when I'm talking to my kids, I said, you need to understand here in school is kind of like the practice field. Like the worst that can happen to you here at the very worst is expulsion, which is rare. But maybe you may find yourself on home instruction where the teacher has to come to you, you can no longer come to the school, but that's about the max. And, anything short of that is a suspension or detention or something along those lines. I said, but when you get out onto the real field and you're not in the practice field, the consequences and what you face are going to be way more severe. It's not just a matter of sitting in the principal's office. You're sitting in front of a judge. So we're constantly trying to share that message. But the reason I asked you that question about different, because the name of this show is The Reading Circle, and we're constantly promoting the value of reading. And the earlier you start and the more you get engaged in things like what you just described, in my mind, the better off and the chance of success is much greater. And so when I hear that, my heart warmed because I have similar experiences. People always ask me, where did you develop your love for reading so much? And quite frankly, it came from me watching my father read Jet magazine and Ebony magazine and books and so forth and so on. He wasn't college educated, but he might as well have been in terms of what he was able to share after all of his reading. So what we do in terms of our childhood really have an impact and an influence on what we do as adults. And I heard you say you're still connected with one of your teachers. My second grade teacher is still alive, thank God. She actually came a few years ago to my 50th birthday party. My wife knew that was her, and she knew that was one of my favorite teachers. She got in touch with her, and she surprised me and appeared at my 50th birthday party. And so now that I'm talking about it, I have to, give her a call sometime this weekend. Mrs. Royster.
Well, it's important. I had the benefit of a very sound education in my early years, and I also had the benefit of going to church. So, the church played a prominent role in my life from birth.
Absolutely.
So when we start talking about reading, probably the first reading I was doing was from the Bible.
Right.
As a Sunday school student. And so you combine that with reading in school, and I actually I have one fond memory of reading. One of the things that my mom kept all of my report cards from kindergarten. So I have every report card I've ever received. And in one of the report cards, the teacher makes this comment about me, and basically she's saying I tend to be a little bit antisociable. And this is like in first or second grade.
Right.
And I distinctly remember why, because back then, I don't know if they still do it, the teachers used to read to the kids. You used to sit in a circle, the teacher would sit in the middle. Well, when that would occur, I would always be very fidgety, or sometimes I would get up and walk out of the circle. And then one day the teacher asked me, why do I do this? Because she thought it was a little rude to do that. And I told her, I said, well, I don't like people to read to me because I can read.
I know that's right.
So, to her credit, the teacher wasn't insulted by it. She just didn't realize that was the reason why. So from that point on, every time she did reading circles, she said, okay, Walter, you can grab a book that you like, and you can go over there in the corner and read to yourself. So for me, I got lost in books. Like I would spend
Right.
Saturdays in the public library, and you could find me sitting between the stacks with just a stack of books that because that was the way as a poor child. I never knew that one day I would be able to see these places,
Correct,
these type of people, but I could see and meet them through books. And so for me, books became my escape. It was a way of taking myself someplace that I wanted to go, that I hoped that I would get, but this was the best I could do at the moment.
Absolutely. I relate with that so much because that experience we both share, because it was the same for me. I mean, reading took me around the world and places and people, and oddly enough, and maybe it's not so odd, but many of the places and people that I read about, I ultimately wound up meeting or going.
Absolutely. 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 And I remember distinctly, in the 1960s, I mean, we don't even do it well today in schools. They taught very little about Africa.
That's correct.
And they always had these huge maps, Hammond maps. And the Hammond Map Company was actually located in the town in New Jersey that I live today, in Maplewood, New Jersey. But they would pull down the map, and I'd see this big landmass, and they really wouldn't say much about it. I knew that I came from there.
Right.
And as a child, I just said, I'm going to Africa one day. And sure enough, I've been to the continent about 23 times.
Wow.
I've done work in Africa. And so for me, once again, it was sort of making that connection. And many of the people, as you said, that you read about, you had a chance to meet. One of those people became a mentor to me. In 1966, Dr. Robert Weaver, one of the second black person to receive a PhD in economics from Harvard University, became the first black to serve on the cabinet of the President of the United States when he became the first Secretary of Secretary of Housing and Urban Development under Lyndon Johnson. And I remember Dr. Weaver's appointment because it was in Jet magazine, it was in Ebony magazine, it was on newspapers and television. Well, fast forward years later, as a graduate student, one of my professors who was a mentor, Dr. Walter Stafford, Dr. Weaver happened to be his mentor.
Right.
And he introduced Dr. Weaver to me, and Dr. Weaver became my mentor. And I spent hours with this brilliant man in his apartment in New York and just discussing civil rights history. Dr. Weaver's friends were people like Mary McLeod Bethune,
right,
James Weldon Johnson. And in Dr. Weaver's apartment in New York City on the East Side, he had pictures of all these people. He had personal mementos of all these people. And so, like you said, it came to life. People that I read about, I met, and some of them even became my mentors. And so it's a wonderful thing. And I tell children this all the time. You never know where life is going to take you.
Absolutely.
And so for this kid from Hackensack who read about all these people in the civil rights movement, to have these opportunities to go down to Atlanta and have someone walk you into the mayor's office so you could sit down and have a conversation with Andrew Young, those type of things blew me away because I'd never thought that they would happen.
No.
It's a wonderful thing.
It is. And I tell people all the time, I'm not one that gets starstruck because to me, people are people, humans are humans. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, when you do have the opportunity to speak with or talk with or hang around or be in the presence of these various legendary and historical figures, it is an experience. I don't care how old you are. I mean, that's even right. Even the chance of you and I meeting, even that to me, because I mean, I've seen you on MSNBC, I've heard you on WBGO, so forth and so on. So when that Sunday, when you came to the church, immediately I said, I got to contact him to see if he wanted to do the show one morning. And
no, look, that's life.
Yeah, it is.
Right?
It really is. And so from that, when Reverend Clayton said who he was and you walked up to support him, I said, oh yeah, we got to talk and I got to get him on the show because one, you have a message because I'm trying to help the listening audience, particularly if there are any kids in the audience or if they go to the YouTube channel, once I download everything and listen to it later in the archives, there's some important messages that you need to take away from this in terms of what you're hearing Mr. Fields and I talking about in terms of as we progressed along from childhood on into adulthood. And again, since there is a connection between reading, writing, and speaking, if you have been listening to Mr. Fields throughout this interview, you have not heard him say one Now, I teach a public speaking course. Actually, we started one up at the church. And for we're in our 5th week now. I've had 10 adults that we've been working with public speaking, and we're constantly working on those fillers. And some of those are in the listening audience. Some of the folks in that class listen, and you have not heard Mr. Fields say one filler as we've been talking. That, again, is connected to the reading, the writing, and speaking. They're all connected, which is a part of communications. You see that he had his own company, Fields Communications. New Jersey-based public affairs consultancy and communications. All that is a part of communicating, being able to speak, how you carry yourself, your body language, when you're in the presence of people, how you carry yourself and talk and so forth and so on. All that is a part of communications, but it links back to what he was doing as a child. He was going to city council meetings. He was going to the mayor's office. He was writing the president. I laugh because I used to write letters to the editor all the time as a kid as well. And even when you were talking about the first council person in Hackensack, St. Luke birthed the first African-American council person in Patterson. And that was with Sam Hughes years ago. Sam Hughes was the first African-American council person that Patterson had, and it came out of St. Luke. Wonderful. So I definitely relate to your experiences. And now I'm going to fast forward because you took your experiences and now you're using it, or you've used it to help folks understand our history. Even the title of your newsletter or your blog or whatever it is that you call it, North Star News, is historically related. So let's talk a little bit about that. Let's fast forward into North Star.
Well, NorthstarNews.com, we established it in 2002, and I came up with the idea on the set of MSNBC with my colleague, Rob Tarver. We were just looking around the studio one day, and we said, why aren't African Americans engaged in this new online technology?
Right.
Like, there has to be a way for us to take advantage of this new medium. And I came up with the concept of NorthstarNews.com. And North Star News takes its name from the North Star, the paper that was founded and published by Frederick Douglass.
Correct.
Who was a childhood hero of mine. One of the early books on Black history figures that I read as a child was My Bondage and My Freedom by Frederick Douglass. So Frederick Douglass has always played a prominent role in my life. In fact, my home screen on my smartphone is a picture of Frederick Douglass, because Frederick Douglass was an amazing man. He was a man before his time.
Correct.
And I think when people really understand who Frederick Douglass is, we would give him a higher place of honor.
That's correct.
In the pantheon of Black history, if you really understood who Frederick Douglass was and the type of life that he led during that period of American history. So what I've tried to do is move into this medium after all these opportunities with the Record newspaper, being the first Black columnist for that paper, with WBGO, with MSNBC, with the New Jersey Reporter, to begin to move into the area of communicating mainly to the African American community, because one of the things that we have to do a better job is consuming information.
Yes.
And consuming the right content.
Yes.
Because, as I tell everyone all the time, particularly in the political world, we live in a country where very little, except for classified information, is hidden. The United States government provides more information on what it's doing than any government in the world. And so if you really want to know what's happening in Congress, well, guess what? You can go to the Congressional Record online, where every word is printed of every committee and every session of Congress every day.
That's correct.
Free. So we're not living in a country where it's difficult to get information. The question becomes, as consumers, do you know where to go? And once you know where to go, are you retrieving that information? So North Star News, we attempt to provide that type of information, but we also attempt to provide a perspective on America that you won't necessarily get by reading the New York Times or by reading the Washington Post, because there is a black perspective, and there are many black perspectives of political events and political incidents that unfortunately don't have a platform. That's what NorthStarNews.com provides, is that platform.
That's correct. And it's so important. And this is where we kind of come full circle in why we're constantly encouraging people to read or research. And one of the things, because I have a blog as well. As a matter of fact, maybe I'll talk to you about the possibility of contributing or something. But one of the things in terms of us not reading, and especially a 2017, because the next blog post that's already in my mind that I know I'm going to write is, there has never been a time in terms of being a student or a teacher for that matter, a better time than it is right now in terms of accessibility to information. And I remember a couple of weeks ago, I posted that on Facebook or one of my social media sites. I'd say, and that's all I posted was, there's never been a better time to be a student or a teacher than it is right here in 2017. So someone shot back at me, how so? And then I went on to explain in terms of, it's not as if you got to have to go to the Dewey Decimal System or the card catalog or the encyclopedia. It's not like you have to put a whole lot of effort into finding information. It's just like you just said. It's just a matter of going to the internet and keywording what you're looking for, and the information is there. Mm-hmm. So in terms of having information, it's never been a better time of being able to access it. And you are so right in terms of the country sharing information of no other country in the world, because a lot of the countries, the citizens, there's no way in the world they share their conversations and the thought process behind this bill and that law. They don't share that with their citizens. And we do. Right. And at the same time, you said in terms of platforming, it goes back to what you said as children, because when I was a child, Black history wasn't really taught either. I mean, it's still not really taught. I mean, everybody knows Martin Luther King. That's about as far as it go. Right. When you get into the Frederick Douglasses, right, they're not very familiar with that. Now, I had the opportunity to visit the Frederick Douglass house a couple of years ago when I was in Washington. Mm-hmm. And when I was there, matter of fact, in my office, sitting behind me is the big poster of Frederick Douglass with his quote on reading. Once you learn to read, you will forever be free. The time for us to be able to learn about things and then act and do has never been better. And yet in too many instances, almost like that Iyanla post that I read this morning about, you watch the pain and you want to take the pain away for the person, but they don't see it. That's almost like what I see in almost like us as a race sometimes. It's like, oh my God, for those of us that kind of like, okay, come on now, we can pull together and get this information together and make action and do what we need to do. But there are so many that are just, they don't know at the time that we have that kind of a power. So not only is it not being shared with us, in many cases, even if it is being shared, you won't read it. And I'm talking again from the perspective of working in an urban area, urban school with children who, I mean, a lot of them may not have had the family upbringing that we have. But we try to help them, at least in schools that I serve. I try to make sure they get an opportunity to be exposed to this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, reading and learning are very important. And education is important. And I think we have to talk about the concept of learning because, unfortunately, the state of our schools today make it very difficult for children because you have schools that either don't have libraries or have a minimal library. So as a community, we have to instill this love of learning in our children.
That's correct.
And we have to remind them that one of the greatest crimes that an enslaved African could commit was reading.
That's correct.
And there was a reading. So for our young people, we need to make them understand the power of the written word and why it's so important that they read. And we have to also be able to teach them the ability to decipher information.
Correct.
Because while we live in an age where information is accessible, not all information is equal.
Correct.
And on the internet, we have a lot of information that is blatantly false.
Right.
Or blatantly constructed in a way to change the narrative to something that is not truthful. So, there's a responsibility on adults.
Right.
To make sure that not only children read, but children develop analytical skills at a very early age, to be able to read, to be able to understand sources of information, to be able to understand what's credible and what's not, to be able to think independently, which I always stress to young people, that you have to be able to have critical thinking that allows you to develop independent thoughts where you can come to your own conclusions, draw your own conclusions after you have taken the time to read multiple sources of information about a subject. And so that's something that has to really be instilled in you at an early age. And we have to make young people learn to love. I learned to love to write at a very early age.
Right.
So not only was I reading, but I was always writing little short stories.
Right.
You know, by the time I got into middle school, I was editor-in-chief of the school newspaper. By the time I got in college, I was actually writing op-ed pieces as a college student at Morgan State that the Baltimore Afro-American would run in their newspaper. My first published works were as a college student. So because I started writing so early, by the time I got to college, I was a very strong writer. But the one thing I will tell you about my experience at Morgan, I came in as an honors student. I came in as an A student in English. And my professor at Morgan State, Dr. Ivor Jones, my first assignment, when I thought I was sort of the arrogant smart kid, I handed in my assignment and I knew I had an A. When I got the paper back, I'd never seen as much red.
So much red, that's right.
And I was literally in tears. I was crying. And I sat with Dr. Jones. I asked to meet her after class, and I was upset. And she said, "Young man, sit down." And she said to me, she said, "Look, you are a very strong writer. Your high school should be credited with developing your writing skills." Right. And she said, "You're obviously smart because you're an honor student. You're a freshman honor student." But she said, "My job is to make you a great writer."
That's right.
And so she taught me a lesson to say, look, you always have room for improvement.
That's right.
And as strong as a writer as I was, what Dr. Jones was telling me, by the time you finish my class, son, you're going to be a great writer.
That's right.
And so look at these notes that I wrote because they have meaning and they will help you. And that was a powerful lesson as a writer, as someone who's written for publications, for MSNBC.com. You know, the editing process can be brutal.
Yes, indeed.
Like you write a piece and you think it's the best piece in the
That's
world.
Right.
The editor calls you and he's tearing your piece apart. Not just because of grammar, but whether or not your facts are together.
That's
whether
right.
or not, the structure. And so one thing about writing is a process that will humble you.
That's right. That's right. I'm laughing for a couple of reasons.
Yes, I encourage young people all the time to write because I think it's a good exercise.
Yes.
It will make you want to get better. Every piece that I write, and I have a chronology of all my writing through the years. I've written over 600 articles. Every piece that I write, I swear in the beginning that I write it, it's going to be the best.
That's right.
And I want to make sure it's better than the piece that I wrote before.
That's right.
For me, I'm writing a book right now, and part of what I am searching for something that doesn't exist, writing perfection.
When you get it written, we'll have you back on here. When the book is out, we'll come back on and we'll talk about the book. But I'm laughing because you took me back to two experiences. And the whole writing one, I had the same one with the professor's name. And it's funny, we don't forget these people's names either. His name, Professor Don Edwards. And I turned my paper in the same way, and it came back. Every other word was read too wordy. TOOWORDY, too wordy. Everything was crossed out, this, that, and the other. So I had that same experience, the same, somewhat similar conversation. And I had the same experience, and I just shared this with the public speaking class the other night. I had the same experience with speaking. I was in a Toastmasters group, and again, I went in there because I knew I could speak. I was I was speaker par excellence. And so now we came to rewards dinner at the end of the year, and they're handing out plaques. And I just knew I was getting Speaker of the Year. I just knew that. And when we went to that dinner, so as we go through the various categories, my name wasn't called. And we get down to the last category, which was Most Improved Speaker. And I said, I know that can't be me. That's whose name was called, was mine. Most Improved. And I still have that plaque hanging on my wall to this day. But you're right. Speaking and writing, they are very humbling experiences. And the folks who are editing and picking them apart are doing that to make you better.
That's right.
So that's why I was... That's why I was laughing as you were sharing the experience.
No, and it's why it's important to encourage children at a very early age, because as a child, you lose fear.
Right.
And you don't mind going out and making mistakes. Look, my first credentials as a journalist was as a 7th grader. My middle school had a television station, and I was crew chief of the television station. And in 1972, George McGovern was running for president.
That's right.
And they had a huge rally for him at the Bergen County Courthouse, the Bergen County Democrats. Well, my middle school television station requested credentials to cover that event, and they were granted. So we covered a George McGovern presidential rally, and we interviewed Senator McGovern and Senator Ted Kennedy, who was there. So we had no fear. We were standing up against NBC and
That's right.
CBS, ABC, the big networks, and these little kids. We're there. We didn't know that we were little. We didn't think that we were little kids and shouldn't be there. We were journalists. And I'll never forget, they had a press conference in the courthouse, under the courthouse dome after the rally. And all the media were there and all the big New York City TV stations. And here we were, 3 little kids with a camera and a microphone and a sound pack. And I'll never forget Senator Kennedy looking over and saying, "Who are those kids?" And because at that time, it was really a unique thing for a school to have a TV station. But we didn't think anything of it because we were told by our advisors at Hackensack Middle School that we were journalists.
That's right.
And so we took it upon ourselves to be journalists. And we didn't think anything of it, that we were only 11, 12-year-old, 13-year-old kids, and these other people were adults who had went to journalism school. We felt we were on an equal plane.
That's right.
Because we didn't have fear. And so if you start as a child, you won't have any fear. People always ask me, how can you speak in front of all these people?
Right.
Just like off the cuff. I said, because you know what? I was in so many plays at Varick Memorial AME Zion Church and so many school productions that I don't even see people when I'm on the stage.
Right.
I'm just talking because I lost that fear as a child. And it's interesting because, I used to sing in a church choir. I don't sing anymore. And I'm amazed at singers. I love music, so I'm always amazed at the gift of someone who can sing in front of an audience. And one of the most memorable experiences I had during it, I spent a stint on formerly KISS FM in New York City doing the news for almost a year on their morning show. And one morning, one of the guests was one of my all-time favorite performers, Stevie Wonder. And in the studio, the guest always sat next to me.
Right.
And that morning, Stevie Wonder, for 2.5 hours, gave an impromptu concert with his keyboards, just basically playing anything that we wanted to hear live on the air. And I sat there and just looked at him and was amazed. But I go back to, when did Stevie Wonder start?
Right.
As a child.
As a child.
So for him, it was just as natural. I mean, he sat there and said, okay, tell me what you want to hear. we're giving him songs from the 60s, from the 70s, and he's just ripping them 2.5 hours. You know, one of my prized possessions is a picture from that day with Stevie.
Right.
But you have to give children the opportunity at an early age to lose fear.
That's right.
Not fear putting themselves out in a public way, to not fear being criticized for something that they wrote or for being corrected in the manner in which they speak. Because if they start as a child, by the time they become an adult, they are going to be confident in who they are.
Absolutely. And you are so right. And that's where, to me, and again, I can only speak for being in an urban situation in what is considered, quote unquote, failing district. I don't know if districts that are considered, if there is such a thing, successful, go through the same things that we go through. And when I say that, whenever I hear you describe having a TV studio in middle school, I don't know if that's part and parts of the times that we came through, or because of now the emphasis and the focus is so much on the assessments and testing and all that. But when I came through, we had all those experiences in school as well. And it made for a well-rounded child. A lot of those things that you were just talking about that were in a school right now have all been pulled out, either due to budget or due to the focus on language arts and math. At this point, the kids only do language arts and math tests. That's almost the way it runs. There are no, they barely get music, barely get art. Like you said, the librarians are gone. So there are very little enriching experiences during the school day, beyond language arts, math tests. And to me, that is robbing of our children of those experiences, to not be afraid of what you just described. In terms of when I came through, I can remember having print shop and Photoshop and working the TV cameras and wood shop. And I mean, we had so many different things throughout the school career that you really could say, that's what I want to do whenever I'm older. But a lot of those experiences, at least in the district and school that I serve, a lot of those experiences are no longer there. The only thing the kid get is 90 minutes of language arts, 90 minutes of math, and then they're hit with all these state tests and on and on and on. So it's almost like we're robbing kids of the experience.
Well, absolutely. But see, this is where the community has to step in.
That's right.
So all learning doesn't have to take place in the school building.
That's right.
So we've convinced ourselves that the only place where children can learn is in a school building between the hours of 8 a.m. and 3 p.m. And we're robbing our own children because we're not providing the extra resources. And I'm not talking about money. It's principally time.
Correct.
Invested in teaching children. And even though, you know, I had the benefit of all these great things, a television studio, a school newspaper, we had our own dark room in middle school where we developed.
That's right.
Film. Even though I had all of those things, the most important thing I had in the school building were teachers who were concerned about my welfare.
Correct.
And so I always tell people the most important people in that building are the school teachers.
Correct.
If you don't have school teachers who, number one, love children.
Correct.
I don't know how you can be a teacher and you don't love children.
I agree.
So you have to love children. Then you have to have in your heart a willing spirit to teach and develop a child, a young mind. I had teachers who looked at me and said, oh, Walter has an interest in this. Let me make sure I exposed him to this. And one quick example, in my elementary school in the 1960s, in our little elementary school library, we got a book called The Negro Almanac. It was the first really encyclopedia of Black history. I was the only kid who was taking that book out of school. Like I was taking that book, I'd take it out of the library, bring it back, check it out again. I took it out so much that the school librarian called my mother and said, Mrs. Fields, your son is like the only child in the school taking this book out of circulation. I'm going to give you the publisher's name. I think, you should try to buy this book for your son. That book was my Christmas gift as a third grade student, and it still sits on my shelf. Now, fast forward, One of the editors of that book was Dr. Roscoe C. Brown.
Okay.
Years later, I had a chance to meet Dr. Roscoe C. Brown and let him know that that book played an incredible role in my life. And so you have to have teachers who see in a child, who see the potential in a child, and is willing to develop it, is willing to be patient with a child, because we don't have patience with our children.
That's right.
Are willing to be patient with the child, to allow for the fact that they're children and that they're going to make mistakes. They're going to slide back every now and then. But if you see the potential,
that's right.
You have to have it within yourself to say, I want to make sure that this child is a success. And it really warms my heart when my former teachers, I would never forget sitting in an office one day and the phone rang, and I answered it, and the person said, is this Walter Fields? I said, yes, this is Walter Fields. Well, she said, well, I read an article in the Record newspaper today, your column for this week that you wrote, and I just want to tell you that it was great, and it was well written. And I said, oh, I really appreciate that. She said, and I also want to tell you that this is Peggy Allar, your 8th grade English teacher.
Wow.
And literally tears started to fall from my eyes, because for one of my former teachers to pay that compliment.
That's right.
And when I thought back to what she did for me.
That's right.
Teacher, that stuff tears my heart up to this day, because it's sort of like, wow, how blessed was I?
That's right.
To be put in the path of people who cared.
That's right. And see, even the fact that your librarian was observant enough to know that you were the only child in that school that took that book out, and to contact your parent to say you might want to, I mean, even that spoke volumes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think if we want to help our children, it's simple. We have to care. Like, we have to care again.
Yes.
You know, I do a lot of volunteer work with young people, and, you know, it takes a lot of time, you know, but it's like, I do it because I know I wouldn't be here today if people hadn't done it for me.
I could not agree more.
And I just encourage everyone who's listening, take the time out to, like, work with children and young people. Like, invest, and particularly if you are a person of faith.
Right.
You know, take the time. Like, if you read the scriptures, it was clear that for Jesus, children were a priority.
That's right.
And we have to go back to that day of caring and nurturing if we want our community to exist in the future.
This is correct. And while you were on the note of, because I want to come, matter of fact, I'll stay here and then I want to ask you a question. I don't know whether you can hang out a couple more minutes or not, but sure. In terms of the caring you were just talking about, they called me up this week. The NAACP is having, the Patterson branch is having their scholarship breakfast this morning at the church at St. Luke. And so they called me up and said, Mark, look, you know what, we got a ticket for you, and we're throwing in 2 extra tickets if you want to bring some students with you. I said, oh, great. Immediately, I knew which students I was going to choose, and they are the two of the 3 are 2 of my most challenging students in the building. The ones that you were just talking about where the teachers have absolutely no patience for. That's 2 of the kids I selected. Now, the third one happened to be the little boy said, while I was trying to decide, he says, I know another person you could take. And he said it in such a way that it touched me, like you said, because kids can touch you. They can. And I said, who? And so then he goes on to say, and she's very responsible, too. And I said, well, who might that be? And he said, my sister. And so just the fact that he was willing to think about his sister and he articulated it in such a way, I said, you know what? Sure, if she wants to go, she can go too. So I'm taking 3 of them with me to the breakfast this morning if they show up to be picked up. But this little boy was so excited that he was going to be going to breakfast with me. But it does speak to what you were just saying in terms of having the patience. The other piece that I wanted to talk about, because that's what North Star News is based on as well, and you were talking about as a child, you were so interested in that almanac. How big of a factor is the fact that our children need to understand our history as well? And when I say our children, in this instance, I'm talking about African-American children. I mean, and even, because we get into this debate all the time with the Spanish kids too. I have to tell them, and you said it that Sunday morning, I had to laugh because I say that as well. You all need to understand the boats stopped in those Caribbean islands before they got to the United States. Same thing I tell the kids all the time. So you're just as black as I am. So I don't want to hear this blacks against Dominicans, Dominicans against blacks, and all this, that, and the other. But how important is it for folks to understand their history in order for them to kind of like put their plans in order for what they want to do for the future, to not get messed up like we did in some respects based on some of the things that happened in history?
It's absolutely critical. Look, I'm involved right now in a controversy in the town that I live, the South Orange Maplewood School District. In the past week, we had a number of incidents that showed the importance of teaching children the truth. There was an assignment that the children had in one of our elementary schools, fifth graders, and the assignment was to draw posters of slave auctions. And the assignment was given with no context. So in this school, throughout the building, were these posters that children drew of basically black people being sold.
Right.
And we're livid because there was no context. And what followed that assignment were some children who took it upon themselves, because there was no instruction, to actually make a video of one of their classmates, a black girl, being sold and beaten into slavery. And the reason why this happens is because as a nation, we haven't embraced the truth around the black experience.
Right.
And for the African-American community, what we need to understand is that slavery was the first global human trafficking.
Right.
There's no such thing as a slave. There are people who are enslaved. Our history doesn't start on the shores of this country.
That's correct.
In Africa.
That's right.
And so if you don't understand that, then your potential becomes enslaved. Because if you only think of yourself as originating from someone in bondage, you will not have the ability to see yourself as a free person. And this is why we have to teach our children the truth. And we have to let them know that, yes, while slavery existed in the United States, the majority of slaves were not in the continental United States. You have to go to Brazil, South America, the Caribbean. Slavery was a global business. That's why they had companies that were established just for the transatlantic slave trade. And slavery didn't just exist in the southern United States. In the state of New Jersey, which was the last northern state to abolish slavery, we also had slavery. Bergen County was the largest slave-owning county in New Jersey. Where the YMCA sits in Bergen County and Hackensack, that was once a slave plantation.
Wow. I know exactly where that is because I lived out there for a time.
So part of our responsibility is to teach the children their true history. Because if you know yourself, then no one can stop you from reaching your potential.
That's correct.
There will be challenges, there will be roadblocks, but no one can take away the essence of who you are as a person. Our children do not understand their greatness. My great-grandfather was a slave in North Carolina. He became a Union soldier, a Union Army soldier, and fought in the Civil War. His name is on the National African American Civil War Monument in Washington, D.C. That's who I am. That's me. I understand my history.
That's right.
My great-grandfather was a slave who escaped, fought for his own freedom in the Civil War.
I know that's right.
There's no confusion on my part who I am. I'm a warrior.
I know that's right.
I'm supposed to be on the battlefield for change because my great-grandfather, who never even knew if I would ever existed, planted some seeds on the battlefield for me. And now it's my time to cultivate them for the next generation.
That's absolutely right. We're at the 7 o'clock hour. I just need to give the weather again, and then we'll continue on with that conversation. And then, after that, I'll give you the opportunity to promote North Star News and anything else. But very quickly, I'm going to do this because right there is at the crux of what I believe is a lot of the issues that we have in our various communities. And I won't even say just the African American community because it's not just a black thing, quote unquote. I think it's everybody's thing, like you just heard Walter say, in terms of teaching and understanding the truth, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. So we'll talk a little bit. We'll continue on with where we were. I just need to do this. And as you know, Walter, in radio, you got to do things with the FCC. So let me go ahead and get these things out of the way, and then we'll continue on with our conversation.
WPSC, Wayne, New Jersey. On the radio, 88.7 FM. Online, gobrave.org. A tune-in radio station. Part of the William Patterson Broadcast Network.
Broadcasting live from Hobart Hall in Wayne, New Jersey.
This is
The innovative.
I think they're really unique.
The fearless.
They have awesome variety.
The kick-ass.
I love Brave New Radio.
The sensational.
I've never heard anything like it.
This is the one and only Brave New Radio.
Here's your North Jersey weather report.
We've made our way up to 43.7 degrees, or about the same area we were the last time I gave the report, working our way up to a high of 58. We're going to move back to a low of 40, expected to be cloudy today and tonight. And then on tomorrow, Sunday, a high of 43, a low of 38. It's still going to be cloudy and rainy on Monday. 60 is a high, 46 as a low, more clouds, more rain. Tuesday, more clouds, more rain, 69 as a high, 48 as a low. And then finally on Wednesday, it clears up Wednesday evening, actually, because there's a few passing clouds during the day. And on Wednesday night, clearing up, high of 63, low of 35. Well, that is the weather brought to you right here from the WP 88.7 FM Weather Center. And that's exactly who you're listening to, is WP 88.7 FM radio in northern New Jersey and New York. And then all around the world, we web stream live on gobrave.org. That's GOBRAVE.org. Anyone in the world can hear the broadcast if they've tuned into that website. And my guest this morning is Walter L. Fields Jr., and he is one of the founders of North Star News. And I really, truly hope you've been listening since 6, because the interview has been that inspirational and that motivational and historical. And that's the piece we're talking about now. And there was a point that you brought up right before I shared the weather and all that stuff about the African-American experience did not start with slavery. I mean, folks, we go all the way back to kings and queens and folks who invented math and who built the pyramids, so many things that are in our history that are so often overlooked or not taught. I mean, even to this day, and I try whenever I have these discussions to help people understand, because one of my fraternity brothers and great friends, and he's passed away, and I don't know, you may have known him, was Reverend Dr. Fred Lagarde Jr., or Senior rather.
Family friend.
Okay, well, one of the things...
My mother was a member of his church.
Okay, then one of the things Reverend Lagarde used to say is, I'm not anti-white, but I'm pro-black. That's one of the things he used to say quite often. Another thing I remember him for saying is, you're not a success unless you've made a successor. So there's two things. If I don't remember any two things from Fred Lagarde, it's those two things. So when I get into these conversations, I try to help people understand I'm not anti-white, but I am pro-black. Mm-hmm. And I try to help people understand in terms of, like you were just talking about, the truth and teaching the truth. In too many instances, and I see it even going on now with our current administration, it's almost as if Donald Trump's mission, more than being president of the United States, is trying to erase everything the African-American president Barack Obama did. And historically, that's almost been the way things have been. That's why you've needed historically black colleges and universities. That's why you've needed NAACPs. That's why you've needed all these different organizations, because our contribution as African Americans have always been either downplayed, not acknowledged at all, or erased.
Yes.
So,
yes, absolutely.
Whenever you start saying that the experience for African Americans is always portrayed as starting with slavery, that's where it's like, that's a lot of misunderstanding, because you really need to go back beyond the slavery movement.
That's right.
And if you
I think.
Right, go ahead.
Sorry.
No.
I think there are two books that I encourage everyone to read. And one that is The Destruction of Black Civilization by Chancellor Williams. And the other is Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett. I had the opportunity, and it was one of the most memorable moments in my life, to have a private dinner with Lerone Bennett, a 4-hour dinner in New York City, and just was able to really have an in-depth conversation about this issue of history. And part of what we have to do as a people, we have to develop within ourselves the desire to want to know about ourselves. Like, we can't expect other people to teach us our history. We have to have the initiative
as a
community to teach our children our history. Don't expect to send your child to a public school or a private school and for he or her to really be taught the history of our people. That's what we have to do. That's what
that's correct.
Have to do. That's what our churches have to do. We need to go back to the day where on a Saturday in a black church, there were classes being held that were teaching our children the things that we knew they needed to know.
That's right.
And we've become a bit jaded, more than a bit lazy, in taking the time to invest in our children. And so if we really want to understand why our children don't know who they are, we have to hold a mirror up to our own face.
That's right.
Because we haven't done the job. Someone like Reverend Lagarde, who, if people in Patterson and children in Patterson don't know the name Reverend Fred Lagarde Sr., there's something wrong.
That's right.
Because this man was a social justice giant. This is the man who, when Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King would come north, one of the first people he would call on was Reverend Fred Lagarde. So
that's right.
We need to make sure that our children even understand the history of the communities in which they live, let alone the larger national and global narrative. Our children aren't even aware of the history in their own backyard.
That's right.
And if they understood that, like I understood it as a child, to know that the first black city councilman, as I said, Herb Leverett in Hackensack, was my brother's godfather. Well, I also knew Mr. Morrow. I knew Mr. Morrow's sister, Mr. Morrow, who was the first black person to serve in the White House. Mr. Morrow's sister, Nellie, was the first black school teacher in Bergen County.
That's right.
My Hackensack history is intact. I know it. I know my Bergen County black history.
Right.
I know my New Jersey black history. And that's why I have been able, as an adult, to withstand all the attacks on my people. Because you can't tell me about my people because I know who my people are.
That's right.
And if our children knew who they were, we would not have the type of violence we see in our community. If our children knew that their people established the foundations of science and mathematics, we would have an achievement gap in our schools because our kids would be going in and knocking this stuff out because that's what we do.
That's right.
We do science. But we haven't taught them that. So they go in with no sense of who they are, and now too often they are going to school and walking into hostile environments.
Correct.
Where every day they are being told they are not worthy.
Correct.
And their value is being chipped at every day. And if you wonder why so many black children walk around angry, is because every day they are being demeaned. Every day they are being told that they are less than when they are greater than. And unless we get to the point of taking control over the minds and bodies of our young people, we are not going to be here as a people by the end of this century.
You're correct. And
we're at that point.
You're right. And listening audience, understand when Mr. Fields says that these children are being told, it's not necessarily being said verbatim, you're not worth anything. But it is being said through sarcasm. It is being said through body language. It's being said through how they're treated and when they're in the presence. It's absolutely right. No, because no teacher is going to tell you, no, I don't say that. I would never say that to my child. No, you wouldn't say those words, but it comes through in your sarcastic comments. It comes through in your body language, your facial expressions. And the kids, I tell people all the time, there are two audiences who know sincerity: young children and senior citizens. Those two audiences, if no audiences understand and can feel sincerity, it's those two audiences. Children know when you're not being genuine. Your most challenging child knows that.
And sometimes it does come through direct, because that was the experience of my daughter.
Oh, yes.
In high school. A young lady who was extremely bright, a young lady who was extremely gifted in mathematics, scored advanced proficient on every statewide math assessment, who by the time we had to fight for her to get into upper level mathematics courses at Columbia High School in Maplewood, New Jersey, got into 10th grade in Algebra 2, and she had a teacher that every day told her, you don't belong in this class. You should be on a lower level.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
I mean, we had to file a civil rights lawsuit against the school district here, and we were successful.
That's brazen.
So we need to understand that our young people are facing this every day. And so sometimes when they don't want to talk about school, they don't want to talk about it because they're hurt, because they've been injured, because they are so angry they can't talk about it. And so when we see moments where kids just explode and we're like, why are you so angry? Something happened to that child.
That's right.
And we need to understand that. And so parents who are listening, if you are not engaged in your child's school, you are failing your child. If you are not showing up, talking to the teacher and finding out what is going on in that classroom, you have failed your child. If you are not going to a Board of Education meeting and finding out what your Board of Education is doing policy-wise concerning the education of your child, you have failed. And I don't care how busy you are. You cannot be so busy that you can't take the time out for your child.
Absolutely. Oh my God, absolutely. I tease people, and sometimes when I say it, I may say it in jest, but I mean it seriously. We have so many parents, for whatever reason, that abdicated their responsibility, and so many of the children that I serve, the parents literally abdicated that responsibility at delivery. The only participation was in making them and in the delivery. And after that, they've left the child to everyone else to raise, which goes back to the point of, in our community, we must get in there and teach that history, because in other communities, and I always use the Jewish community as an example, they're very clear on never again. They are very clear on that. I've been to Germany. I've been to the Holocaust areas. I've been into the crematoriums and things where all that happened. They're very clear from the time that child is born. This will never happen to us again. And we need to take on that same type of spirit with our children as they come through, in terms of teaching them and working with them and having the patience with them, and even with our adults, because a lot of our adults don't even know our history. We need to have, like you said, go back into these churches and have these discussions. And do you understand this? Do you understand that we did this? Do you understand we did that? In order for them to pass it on. But I love what you do. In turn, like I said, from the point Reverend Clayton said you were coming there and you got it there, I said, oh, that is somebody I have to connect with for sure. At this point in the discussion, and I'm going to have you back, especially once you get the book done and once it's out. But I always turn the microphone over to the guests for them to promote whatever they want to promote. The only thing they can't promote is a dollar amount. But in terms of like your North Star News and all that kind of stuff, or where you're going to be, or any appearances, signings, this and that, you have the opportunity, or shout out, if you want to shout out your family members or anybody listening, this is your opportunity to do so.
Well, I want to thank you, first of all, for inviting me. I really do appreciate any time I get the opportunity to talk about our community. So I thank you for that. For those listening, I just encourage you to visit our website, which is North Star News, all one word, northstarnews.com. And we have a Facebook page under the same name, northstarnews.com. I encourage you to go to our Facebook page and to like our page. But I mostly encourage you to be engaged in the future of our children, to be active participants in the uplift of our youth. Because if we don't do that, then we have done a disservice to all those who came before us. It's no mistake. In fact, it's a miracle that after almost 500 years, we as black people still exist in the United States. No other group of people stood this steady attack. as have the descendants of Africans in America. And we must make sure that 500 years from now, there will remain on the surface of this continent, in this country, a strong Black people. And the only way that will happen is if we do the work now and understand that it requires some sacrifice. And we may not get everything that we want in this lifetime, but someday there will be a generation of African Americans who will be free. It's our responsibility to plant the seeds that they will cultivate.
Absolutely. I'm looking here on North Star News. It says today in Black History, March 25th, Scottsboro boys are arrested in Point Rock, Alabama on this date in 1931.
Yes. And that history, we still have Scottsboro boys today.
Yes.
And so we need to understand that, we have to evolve as a nation, but the United States will not survive if the question of African people is not resolved.
Absolutely right. Well, I tell you, I thank you for rising early to join me. The conversation was top notch, as I expected it to be. And I'll tell you, I'll put you on notice now. I'm looking for a commencement speaker for my 8th grade graduates, and you're right now at the top of the list. So I may be contacting you to say if you're free on whatever our graduation date is, if you'd be interested in being the keynote speaker for our 8th grade graduation. Because you have a message that the community, especially the community I serve, needs to hear. And every year I kind of switch off between male and female. Last year I had a female. I had the judge. I had a judge last year. She spoke. She's our county surrogate. And I had her speak last year. So this year, and having spoken to you, and especially having this interview this morning, I think I may be coming your way. So I may email you and give you the date and everything to say, would you be interested in being our keynote graduation speaker?
Please do. I'd love to do it.
Great. That's good to know. So, all right. Well, I've thoroughly been educated myself. I just love the experiences that you've had, because we could spend another hour talking with the statement I'm about to make right now. And that is the conversation that you and I had, our experiences that we had, was not the expectation for African-American males to have. That the only expectation out of African-American males is to be able to bounce a ball or be able to dance or sing or what have you. But in terms of having educational dialogue, in terms of African-American males who loved reading, who loved speaking, who loved writing, that was not the expectation or the norm. And that would be a whole nother conversation. But the truth of the matter is it does occur. Mm-hmm. And so right. I thank you so much for joining me this morning. I know my listening audience, because I usually get the feedback on Facebook or on Twitter or where have you. So I'm sure folks will be texting me or tweeting me or what have you. But I do record the show. I boil it down, turn it into a YouTube link, because I have a YouTube channel with all the interviews on there. And so I'll be doing that, and I'll send you a copy of the MP3 link as the YouTube link, and you can do whatever you'd like with it.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Thank you. Have a blessed day and weekend and week and rest of the year, what have you. Again, enjoyed the conversation, and I will truly be in touch.
Take care.
You too. Well, that concludes another dynamite edition, and I'm biased, of course, but I will say once again, and I say it often on this show, if no one else gets touched, reached, or blessed by the show, I do. And it may sound selfish, but the hope is there are listeners listening all around the world. The hope is that I would have millions of listeners listening. That would be a wonderful and beautiful thing. But if that is not the case, if no one else is listening and no one else gets blessed or motivated or inspired or entertained, during this time that I'm on the air and having the opportunity to speak from people from all walks of life and from all around the world and from all genres and all jobs. And I have met some wonderful people in the 16, 17 years or so that I have been on the air from all levels, local level, international level, famous level, no famous level, or shall I say non-fame? Because, all of us now with technology, we get our 15 minutes of fame. We do. with Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and Pinterest and Hootsuite and What are some of the video ones? I'm trying to think. YouTube, especially YouTube. Anybody can get their 15 minutes of fame, but I've had the opportunity to talk to international superstars. I mean, when you start talking to Nikki Giovanni's, Alveda Kings, Judge Hatchett, Omar Tyree, the ambassador to South Africa that I had on a few weeks ago, Dr. Steve Perry's. When you start talking to these folks and what's upcoming, April 15th, I'm letting you all know now, circle your calendar for April 15th, because my guest will be Bernadette Stannis, who played Thelma on the show Good Times. And I'm reading her book now, and I didn't realize that she was the first African-American teen portrayed on television. And I didn't realize that until I was reading her book, that she was the first teenage girl, African-American, portrayed on a TV series. The book is fascinating. I can't wait to talk to Miss Stannis in April. That's about in a month or so, maybe 4 Saturdays from now. But Thelma from Good Times will be our guest on April 15th, Tax Day. When I talked to her publicist, I said, I'm going to rename the 15th as Thelma Day. Rather than it being Tax Day, it'll be Thelma Day. But that's April 15th, real easy for you to remember. But she has a fascinating story as well, as she talks about her experiences with her mom, who ultimately wound up with Alzheimer's disease. And she talks about that experience. She talks about her experience with Esther Roll, who played Florida on Good Times. She talks about how Good Times came to being in her book. A couple of the chapters in the book, she explains how Good Times even came about. And we'll talk about it on air, because she says originally they wanted to cast Good Times, and I'm just whetting your appetite. Originally they wanted to cast Good Times as a single mother household. And she said Esther Roll would not allow it. She said, Esther Roll said, absolutely not. I grew up with a mother and father in my house. It does exist in African-American families. Therefore, if we're going to do this show, there's going to be a father in the house. That's how you got the character of James and Florida, JJ, Michael, Thelma. So she's coming up on April 15th. Bernadette Stannis, that's what I say. You heard Walter and I saying it early. We never know in life who we're going to meet, who we're going to talk to, who we're going to be around. So make sure you mark your calendars for that. That's going to be a fun reading circle date, as well as all the dates in between here and now and April 15th and beyond.